This week we have Parshas Tazria Mitzayra. Last week we discussed the fundamental psak of Reb Moshe Feinstein of the Igris Moshe regarding Cholovakum. And by coincidence, once again this week, the topic of today's shir is a psak of the Igris Moshe in a different area. V'safra la, in this week's parsha. Enida, Ezava, counts la'atzma shevenakiyim. According to Taisus Gittin Beis Amid Beis, this pasuk is the source. Ed echod neman be'isurim. In Isav Heter, to testify that this food is kosher. The meat went throh proper shchita. Peresetz soil trumas amaises. How do we know that one person has credibility regarding Isav Heter? According to Tosfos, v'safra Allah. However, Yoredei Kuf Yud Sif Aleph, based on a sugya mefareshes Mesechet Bechoros Achoshud ala davar, enoy neman olav. It is only if you're observant in this area that you could testify to others. A person that doesn't keep kashrus to himself cannot be trusted and relied upon for others. Hachoshud ala davar enoy neman olav. Reb Moshe was asked 90 years ago, when he was still in Russia, could a person rely on his personal conviction, totally subjective? And I was asked this question 100 times, that every time I mention this sugya, I say, Baruch Hashem, in some areas, Achshar Dara, we live in a different world, in a changing world. 90 years ago in Bolshevik Russia, the question was presented by parents, from parents, and their children were no longer from. Could a parent rely on his son or daughter saying, I know my children, they're not from, they're not observant, but they won't do this to us. And we feel, we have total trust that the food they will share with us is kosher food. Nowadays, the question is usually the other way around. Children ask, our parents ain't from. We're balei tshuva. Our parents don't keep kashrus. Could we rely on them? So Baruch Hashem, same question today we deal with is the other way around. And Moshe paskins, yes, a person could rely on his totally subjective personal conviction. And he bases this psak on Ksubis Pehei. To me, that's a very doubtful source. So the course of the shir today, we will check 5 different sugyas that might be a source to the Moshe's psak. We will reject all the 5, and then I'll bring up number 6, which is not a Gemara, but rather a Rambam. So let's embark on our journey, fascinating journey. I will visit 6 different sites and enjoy. Reb Moshe bases his psak on Ksubis Pehei. Ksubis Pehei, there are 2 stories. Rava had a din Torah, and the defendant was Chayiv Shavua. Omru loy bas Rav Chizda. The daughter of Rav Chizda happened to be Rava's wife, but she is called Bas Rav Chizda. Before she was an Eishes Chovah, she was a Bas Talmud Chacham. And obviously that was her Ikar Yichus, the daughter of Rav Chizda. And Rava's wife, who happened to be the daughter of Rav Chizda, tells Rava, I know the person, the defendant, he cannot be trusted. He's choshod ala shavua. You can't trust him with a shavua. So there's a din of afich shavua. So Rava turns the shavua off to the claimant instead of the defendant, to the tovei instead of the nitba. Even though Bas Rav Chizda is not kosher la'edus, she's a woman. Woman is not kosher la'edus. Rava says, Yadana Bey de lo mishakra, but I know her. I know her intimately. She's my wife, and I know she would never lie, and I trust her. The Gemara brings a different story that happened with Rava. So Rava was dealing with another case, and the Toveya presented a shtar. Rav Papa says, that's a shtar mezuyaf. And Rava says, but you're an ed echod. I can't rely on an ed echod. So Rav Ada bar Masna asks Rava, you rely on your wife more than you rely on Rav Papa, who's one of the Gedolei Ador? And Rava says, Basav chizde kimli begava. I know her. I don't know you. I don't know you well enough. And this is a fascinating point. It doesn't depend on your greatness. An ed echod is an ed echod. He doesn't have an amonis, even if he's the Gadol Ador. There needs to be personal knowledge, personal familiarity, personal conviction. Rava says, I know Rav Papa is tremendous, he's great, but there's the lack of this personal conviction. I can't rely on you. Rav Papa says, Im Kain, I could rely on Abameri Bari. Abameri, my son, he's so trustworthy, I rely on him. So I could rely on him. That's Ksubis Pehei. Rav Moshe says what we learn from here. There is validity to personal trust and conviction, like Rav and Bas Rav Chizda, like Rav Papa and Abameri Beno. We find a similar sugi in Yevomis Kuf Aleph Omid Beis. Rav Yehuda says, Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, whom I know, who is totally honest and trustworthy, I would rely on him, karane shtar al piu, to tear a shtar to shreds. And the Gemara says, how could that be? And Dina Momenis al pishnayim edim yokom dava. You need to aid him. So the Gemara retracts. Not karana l'shtora, ela marana l'shtora. You can't tear a shtar based on a ed echod, even though you trust him. But he's neman lahatel doifi, to put aside the shtar, to demand kiyum shtoros. From these two sugyas that contain three stories, there is room for personal conviction. Rav Moshe says the same by Issa v'Heter. And I doubt it for two different reasons. We see that this namonis is valid, but it's limited. In both sugyas, the Gemara says, Lo karana shtora, ela marana shtora. You can't take a step that cannot be drawn back. It's not an unlimited namonis. It is extremely limited. And the Maharsha on the spot explains, La fochet hashvu al tzad hasheni is not hitzos mamoin. You cannot take money out of a person's possession based on a ed posel, even if there's total personal conviction. So how do we compare Issa v'Heter to Marana Shtora al Pihu? I don't know, it's questionable. But the main reason I don't think this could be a source to the Moshe's Psak is another one. I think this is Aloha Mesiemes in Hilchis Dayonim, not in Dina Issa v'Heter. And I need to explain, Hilchis Dayonim is unique. We need to give Dayonim, we need to give a Beis tools to work with. Otherwise, there could be no tzedek in Mishpat. Yes, al pi shnayim eidim yokum davar. Hoidoas baldin kamei eidim dami. But usually, in any din Torah, there is no hoidoas baldin. If the baldin agrees that he needs to pay, they wouldn't be in Beis Din. The reason there are in Beis Din is because the baldin argues, I do not need to pay. Could we rely on eidim? I'm an Av Beis Din for 20 years, a bit more. And I don't remember one case which was resolved based on proper testimony, on Edus Kshero. Because when people do deals and they do business and they sign contracts, who is there? Who is there? Either family members or workers that get paid. They're all postulators. People don't sign contracts in the marketplace, in a stadium where there are 1,000 just beholders, onlookers. Usually there are no eidim ksherim. And especially when a person is machal al Shabbos, horiges a nefesh, he doesn't look for two eidim ksherim and say atem eidai, like a chosen by the chuppah. Usually it's in a situation of v'yifan koi v'choi v'yaki einish. So Beis Din needs more than Eidim. Beis Din needs more than Eidos Baldin. And that is why Chazal came along and they put into place a huge system of chazokas. Chazaka ein odem porei torch zmane. Chazaka ein odem tavei elohim ken yesh lo. Chazaka ein odem mayis ponav b'fnei bar choivoy. Chazaka ein isho ein odem espayis b'mimin. Chazaka ein odem tavei besuda u'mafsida. There are so many chazakas. And these chazakas were put into place beruach kodsham of Chazal based on their profound understanding of behavioral patterns of people. And besides the chazakas and the tainas and migo and bori v'shema, there's an amazing Rambam, a Chiddush, Perek Vav Toyin V'nitin, Shulchan Aruch quotes it in Siman Tez Vav Hilchos Dayanim. A dayan could rely on his personal conviction, not Reb Moshe, not his personal conviction that he relies on another person, but his impression. Just sitting in court, sitting in the Beis Din, listening to the Vei, listening to the Nitva, the dayan develops a feeling of who's right and who's wrong. And that feeling gives him the authority to decide the case. This authority is also limited. As the Nesivis makes it clear in Siman Tez Vav, Oni lahachzek not lahoitzi. But in a way it's similar to the Gemara of Basel of Chizda. Ksubis, Pei Yevomes Kuf Aleph. This is a din in Hilchos Dayanim. And just like a dayan could rely on his personal conviction based on his analysis, what he hears from the Tavei and the Nitva, he could also rely on his personal conviction. I trust Basel of Chizda. Kimli begava de lo mishakra. So I think this is halacha in Hilchos Dayanim. And the context of this halacha, its origin is authority of Beis Din. It has nothing to do with Yechidim in the realm of Isser v'Heter. So we continue our search. Kiddushin Samach Vav. The Gemara says, an Ed Echad tells a man, Ishtacho zinsa, your wife was disloyal, and Asura lebala, Eishes Isha zinsa. He's an Ed Echad. Ein dove shabeva poches mishnayim. He has no nemonus. But if the husband believes him kibeitrei, if the husband happens to know the Seid, and he says, I believe him like two people, he has total trust to me, then yotzia, then he needs to give his wife a divorce. Would this be proof that personal nemonos, personal conviction, I know he isn't lying, would that be enough? No. Ad kan lo lamadnu ela lechumra v'lo lekula. That's a chumra. How do we know lekula? Beyond that, this halacha is probably based on the concept of shavya anafshecha tiche di isura. And that's a basic halacha we learn many times in Shas. Ishu she'amro eishes ish oni cannot get married. We don't have Eidim. We don't know she's an eishes ish, but that's what she said. And if she said, legabe atzmo, she is Namon, so we won't let her get married if she said eishes ish ani. She's trying to retract, but we won't accept that. So the Ktsois HaChoshen Lamed Daled Daled and the Chem de Shloima was a contemporary of the Ktsois. Chem de Shloima, Tshuvas Or Chaim, Ted Zayin, both say, Heidos Baldin and Shavya and Avshech Tichud Esiyar are the same, two sides of the same coin. Odom Neman Lechoivosoi, whether it's in monetary issues or in Issa Ve'eta. I myself wrote a big contest which never was printed yet, and I don't know why these Gedolim put together these two halachas. I think the two separate halachas, they have no connection one to another. But that's not our topic today. In Pashtus Advorim, the sugi of Eishes Ish is based on Shavya and Avshei Chatich L'Siyah, and the Chiddush of the Gemara in Kiddushin is, it is not only when a person says, I know personally, Eishes Ish Ani, Niskadashti, that there's Shavya Nafshech Aticha Desira, even though he doesn't know personally. But I believe him. And he says that to me this is an Isser. That is also Shavya Anafshech Aticha Desura. And that is why if the husband believes the Ed, total trust, then he needs to divorce his wife. But that has nothing to do with trusting a person lekula. Another argument that if Tshuvas Rashba, Miyochosus, Tshuvas Miyochosus, Tzemach Lamed Gimel say it's only, let's say, Seder Shamayim, it's not Miyekar Adin. The Rashba writes, Efshar Sheli Boi Noikfoi. The Ritva says the same in Kedushin Samach Vav. So according to these Rishonim, this would definitely not be a source that you could rely on personal trust. Lekula by Yisavaheta. Source number 4 brings us to היוםהשחור Ksubas Chav Beis Omed Beis. Trei utrei. Shnayim oimer meis bala, shnayim oimer loy meis, loy tenos, avim nises lo teitzei. And the Gemara asks, why? Why im nises lo teitzei? Chayeves chatos, she has a cheskas eishes, so we don't know whether she's an almona or not. Trei v'trei, shnayim oimer meis, shnayim oimer loy meis, lama lo teitzei. Benises le'echod mi'eideya. The person she'd married is one of the two Eidim that say, I saw he died, and therefore I know. Fundamentally, what the Gemara means is this: Beis Din doesn't know. From the point of view of the Beis Din, it's a suffix. Trei utrei is a suffix. And because the husband says, I know, then Beis Din says, Sheval Taisi, we won't intervene. But the Gemara asks, he knows, but what about her? Bo'omeres borili. 3 different pshotim in the Rishonim. How does she know? What do you mean, bo'omeres borili? Rashi writes, I know my husband. If he would be alive, he would come back. He wouldn't leave me alone. Orches Chaim, I think, writes, my husband loved me, and therefore I am convinced that if he would be alive, he would be here. And therefore, no doubt on my mind that he's dead. And the Ran rejects Rashi totally, and the Ran says, there could be 1,000 reasons a person is alive and he's not here. Not because he chose not to be here. Maybe he's in captivity. Maybe he's in custody. Maybe he's sick, maybe he was injured, maybe he's in a hospital, maybe he's deranged, maybe there are so many reasons that he might be alive and he cannot come home. So how could we rely on Omeres Borili? The Ran says Omeres Borili means I saw, I was there. And what the aide says, I saw it as well. I saw him die. And therefore this is personal knowledge. So Beis Din says, if he's convinced and she's convinced, we won't separate them. It is only Toises Yeshonim that says, Omeres Borali, I know the aid and I trust him. So Toises Yeshonim could be a source that a person could rely on his personal conviction, personal namonis, even lekula. But that is only 1 out of 3 pshotim. And nobody brings Toises Yeshonim. All the great poskim decide who is right, the Rashi or the Ran. This halacha is brought in Even Ezer, Siman Yud Zayin, Sif Lamed Zayin, and the Bira Gra. Sif Koten Kuf Chov Dalet, the Gra says that the Machabes learns in accordance to the Ran. Lecha Mishnah Perik Yud Beis Melchas Gerushin, and the Rambam says no. The Ikar halacha is Kepeush Rashi. They don't even bring Toises Yeshonim. So once again, this cannot be a source to our Shaila. I think for additional reasons, this cannot be a source to the Psak of Reb Moshe. It is clear in the Gemara, lo tinasei. It is only b'di'evet im nisas lo teitzei. That is a b'di'evet shaila because Beis Din don't know and they seem to be convinced out of personal knowledge. It's only b'di'evet, not lechatchila. So how could we learn from here that a person could lechatchila rely on his personal trust? So we continue on our quest, which brings us to Psochim Kuf Yud Gimel Amid Beis, which is a sugya of totally different nature than the first 4 sources. We're dealing with Hilchas Lashon Hara and the Isa Lo Tisna Es Ochicho B'Levavcha. So if a person sees a person doing an Aveira, he's not allowed to tell anyone about it because It's Lashon Hara. If you would be two Eidim, you have an Amonus. And Eid Echad doesn't have an Amonus. So it's just pure Lashon Hara. And then the Gemara asks, how about his Rebbe? Could he tell his Rebbe? Could he share what he saw with his Rebbe? And the Gemara says, if he knows that his Rebbe will trust him, total trust, then he should share this information with his Rebbe. But if not, Lashon Hara, he should not. So obviously the Rebbe is entitled to believe him. If the Rebbe can't believe him, then what heter does he have to tell his Rebbe? So it seems to be clear in the sugya. If the Rebbe believes him, he has the right to take action out of personal conviction and personal trust. And that's lekula velo lechumra. So maybe this could be a source to the Moshe's Psak. And once again I say, I don't think so. So I want to ask a fundamental question on this sugya. Why did Chazal ask, could he tell his Rebbe? What's the difference between his Rebbe and any other person? My feeling is, I rejected the first source as a raya, Ksubis Pehei. I said that's a din and beis din. And I think this sugya, Psochim Kuf Yud Gimel, is a din, not in beis din, but in Hilchas Rabbanos. Hilchas Rabbanos and Hanhogas Hatzibur. A Rav, a leader of a Jewish community, has a responsibility la'afrusha me'isura, la'hamed es hadas al tila, la'chazek et bidkei habayis. And in the context of this holy duty, not always could we rely on proper testimony, on edus kshera. As I commented before, usually when a person does a terrible transgression, he doesn't see to it that there are proper eidim. And a Rav sometimes needs to rely on his personal conviction and an umdana, circumstantial evidence. I think that was the question. So the Gemara says if you're an Eid Echad, you cannot tell what you saw because it's pure Lashon Hara. Those people have a prohibition not to believe you. Also lakabel Lashon Hara. And then the question is, how about my Rebbe? Maybe the Rebbe needs to know, either to do his utmost to be machzeh b'tshuva, and if he's not successful, the person doesn't want to be tshuva, he needs to be moicha. He needs to tell others they should stay away. And that is why the question is, could he tell his Rebbe? And that is the response. If he knows his Rebbe will trust him, yes. And his Rebbe has the obligation, either to be machzeh b'tshuva or to be moicha. So that once again is an inyonei tzibur, responsibility resting on the shoulders of a manig, of a rav, to see to it, to be mechazik chomes hadas. And that is why the question was regarding a Rebbe. That would be my understanding in Psochim Kuf Yud Gimel. So we visited 5 sugyas. The common denominator at Tzad Shuvah between all these sugyas is personal conviction, which has validity, as we saw in each and every one of these sugyas. Afal Piken, none of them would really be a source to be mekel be'isa v'heta. Is the Rambam, is the Moshe right or wrong? Definitely right. That's my feeling. But I don't think he has a raya from Shas, Rambam. Perek Daled Halacha Aleph Milchus Korban Pesach. And this is a fascinating Rambam. The Rambam actually appears in 3 different sugyas. Sof Perek Yud Tes Psula Mikdoshin, Sof Perek Yud Beis Hilchos Ma'isa. But I chose to read the halacha from the Rambam in Korban Pesach. Kvar nisbar behilchos psula mikdoshin shah Pesach ein nishchat ela l'shem Pesach o l'shem bora v'imshachtoi b'machsheve shelo l'shma pasul. Very first Mishnah in Zvochem. Kol ha-Zvochem shenizbachu shelo l'shmon ksherim chutz men ha-Chatas u'men ha-Pesach. And then the Rambam continues. Ha-shoichet es ha-Pesach al b'nei chavoro ve'amar lechem le'achar zman. Oisei Pesach sheshochati alechem sheloi l'shmoi shechatetev. Posel HaKorban. Im hoyu ne'emon lohem soinchem al devorov. Im hoyu ne'emon lohem soinchem al devorov. V'im lav shuras adin she'einoi ne'emon. So the shochet has no nemonis to say that the korban is possible. V'yafal piken im hoyu ne'emon aleim soinchem al devorov. Soinchem al devorov means they bring another korban. That other korban might be chulin ba'azorah. Because if he doesn't have an nemonis, then the Pesach is a Pesach kosher. How could you bring another korban? So the Kesef Mishnah says, no, they're just nimno together with another chabura. So there's no question about the kashrus of the other Pesach. Afal piken, but you're eating a Pesach shalol menuyov, and that's an aveira. And if the Rambam means nimna al korban achad, the Rambam should say that. Soimchem al devorov is mashma, the entire group. Soimchem al devorov, and they bring another Pesach. So it is a problem. And the Lechem Mishnah says, there is no solution of bringing a Pesach al Tanai, because the Matan Domim is not the same. Pashtus inyan harambam uleshoin harambam soimchem al devorov, to bring another korban Pesach and disregard the chashash of chulin ba'azorah. And that is the way the Netziv understood the Rambam in 6 or 7 different sources in his form. He'emek Shala, Shil Techov Zayin, Chuvas Meshav Dova Chelek Aleph, Chelek Beis, I think it's 2 different Chuvas, Simen Beis, Simen Hey, and that is Pashtus, the Rambam, in 3 different sources. So the Kesef Mishnah on the spot quotes the Gemara in Kedushin Samach Vov, but as I explained before, it has nothing to do with this. Kedushin Samach Vov is Shafsha Nafsh Chaticha de Surah. It's only lechumra v'lo lekula. It's only letzeis yedei shamayim. The Ikar source of the Rambam is another point the Kesef Mishnah brings. This is not a Mishnah nor a Gemara, but a Tosefta. And the Loshen of Tosefta is Shuras Adin Einoi Ne'eman. Kesef Mishnah is like Shuras Adin Einoi Ne'eman. But Im Hoyu Ne'eman Aleim Soimchem al Devoram. And I think this would be the source of Reb Moshe's Psak. And I think that this Rambam would be a valid source to the Psak of Reb Moshe. So Reb Moshe's Psak, we find 7 or 8 different shuvas in Neges Moshe. Primarily, Yoredei Chelek Aleph Simen Nun Daled, Yoredei Chelek Aleph Simen Samech Hey, Yoredei Chelek Beis Simen Mem Gimel, Even Ha'ezer Simen Yud Beis Choshe Mishpat Limet Zayin. Many different variations of this fundamental approach. But the very first and fundamental shuv is Chelek Aleph Simen Nun Daled, and that is where he brings the Gemara Subis Pei. All the other sources I have put together regarding this novel Psak of Reb Moshe. In various different shivas, it's mashma for Reb Moshe that this Nemona says even lagabe acherim. But what I wrote is, to me it is clear, it is only the one that has personal trust and conviction. It is irrelevant to others. Shuvas atash but chelek aleph simesamech, maybe it's chelek beis simesamech, but definitely simesamech. The Tashbetz discusses the Moranos, the Anusim. Anusay Sfarad of Portugal. So the decree was either you convert to Christianity or leave the country. Hundreds of thousands of Jews by Mesiras Nefesh left the country and they went to exile. Others converted. Many of them in earnest, many of them only lefonim, but they continued to be Mekayim Mitzvahs Hashem B'tzino, in hiding. So the Tashbetz discusses a question, person that knows one of those people and he trusts him, could he drink from his wine? And the Tashbetz writes, if you trust him, you could, but only for yourself. You can't sell or give that wine to others. And we see from this Tashbetz, personal conviction might be relevant for yourself, but not for others. So would the Tashbetz be a source to the Moshe's Psak? I think yes, but maybe no. Maybe the kavanah of the Tashbetz, if you trust him, is not, you know that he's not observant, but you trust him anyway because you know he won't lie. Maybe the kavanah of the Tashbetz, if you trust him that he's Yarei Shamayim, if you trust him that B'tzinu is Makayim the mitzvahs, And if you trust him that he is a Adam Kosher b'Yisrael, not knowing he's not a Adam Kosher, but you trust him anyway, Im Kain, it has nothing to do with the Psak of Reb Moshe. So I think this year is a very interesting analysis of a Psak of Reb Moshe. We visited 5 different sugyas and briefly discussed each and every one of them and rejected them all. And finally, I think Reb Moshe has a source and 3 different Piskei Halacha in the Rambam. Korban Pesach, Psula Mikdoshen, and Hilchos Ma'aser. This week's Parsha is Tazria Mitzayre, and it's all about Negoim. And Chazal teaches both in Gemara and Eirchen and in Medrash. Nedorim come as punishment and as a kapora to Lashon Hara. Chazal are extremely harsh regarding the Yisrael Lashon Hara. Ad she'amru Shokol keneged gimel averes chamur shebetoyre shvichas dam ha'maved zor in gili arayas. Bo v'nachzik toiv l'chofetz chaim, that great giant, that great tzaddik. He wrote Chofetz Chaim Hashmias Aloshen, and I think he changed the world. He brought to the awareness of Shomer Mitzvahs, the halachas of Lashon Hara, the chumra of Lashon Hara. Boy v'nachzik toiv to the great Gerer Rebbe, the Yemre Emes, because the Chofetz Chaim was the giant in Lithuania. But Polish Jewry was less familiar with the Chofetz Chaim. Until the Gerer Rebbe wrote a letter, and he wrote, I myself had a great te'eles from the Chofetz Chaim, and that is for why I call to all my Hasidim to learn Chofetz Chaim every day. For a tzaddik ador to write, I saw te'eles by learning Shmias Aloshen, is an amazing phenomenon. And that is really what made inroads for the Chofetz Chaim in Poland, which was the biggest center of Yiddishkeit in pre-Holocaust Europe. So Lashon Hara is so important, but so few people really learn Lashon Hara, Hilchos Lashon Hara, and even try to adhere to the halachas. Why is that? There's a beautiful story told in Avodah Zorah Yutes and a Medrash Shabbat this week's Parsha. And he would declare and scream out and cry out, who wants to buy potion for life? Many charlatans through the ages tried to sell a potion for life. Drink this and you're going to live forever. Drink that and you're going to live 150 years. Many people surrounded this Reichel and say, yes, we want to buy. Show us what it is. Hoitzi Sefer Tehillim. V'hayu koire mitoichoi. Mi uisha Chofetz Chaim moyev yomem l'restoiv l'tzoy l'shoicho meros v'secho medabe miyamo. And the Gemara says, according to one source, it's Rav Yanai, according to the other, it's Rav Alexanderi. But these great Amoraim said, Kol yom ha'hivisi kodesh ha'posek hazeh v'lo yedati eich lefarshoi ad shebo rochel zeh. And we wonder, we relearn, re-examine the text. He didn't say any pshat, he didn't say any drasha. Hoitzi sefer tehillim v'hoyu koire metoichoi. So, why were these great Amoraim so nespoil? Kol yom ha'hivisi kodesh ha'posek hazeh, and I didn't understand what it means. I think we need to closely examine this story. Masa beroichal echad. Interesting. Why not a sandler? Chenvani, choitev eitzim, shayev mayim, oise sheichar. We find many occupations that the great Tanoim and Amoraim did for a living. And of all of those, Masa beroichal echad, you cannot escape the symbolism. Where is the Torah Asa Lashon Hara? Lo yiselech rochil ba'amecho. Rashi explains why rochel. Because a person that talks Lashon Hara is like a peddler. A peddler buys and sells, buys and sells. Unlike a real estate agent. He buys once in a year and he sells twice a year. A peddler is busy all day, buying and selling, machnes u moitzi u machnes. And that is like a balosh hara. He hears and he talks, he hears and he talks, he buys and he sells. That's what keeps him busy and keeps him happy. Matzeh b'roicha lechod, shoyim esave ba'ayoras asmuchim litzipori. You can't escape the symbolism. Tzipori. Why Tzipori? Of all the cities in the Middle East, in Eretz Yisrael. So in Parshas Tazria we learn Hilchos Nagoyim, in Parshas Mitzaira, Taharas HaMitzaira. How is a Mitzaira oila mitumer tahara? Shnei Tziporim. Why Tziporim? Once again Rashi. Birds chirp all the time. Most animals have voices. A lion could roar, and you will hear that roar miles away. But lions don't roar all day. Most of the day, they're quite quiet and quite sleepy. Only the birds are never quiet. Birds are always singing and chirping away. And that is why Taharas HaMetzoyra is B'tziporim. It is a remes for the Metzoyra. Keep your mouth shut. You don't need to talk all day. So let's get back to the story. Maaseh b'roicha lechod, of all the occupations, roicha. Shohoyim esave b'yoras asmuchim litzipori, of all the cities and towns, tzipori. What this person meant to convey is, there's a mistaken perception. You think, if you want to be okay in Hilchos Lashon Hara, you need to be a strange and peculiar man. You need to stay away from people. You need to be a hermit. You need to be in yourself and not interact with others. And we don't want to be that way. One of the fathers of modern psychology said a very fundamental axiom, fundamental idea. Man is a social being. Is he correct? Of course he is. Because one of the greatest Ameroim said it 2,000 years earlier. Rava in Masechet Tanis. When we learn the story of Choni HaMa'agel that slept 70 years, and when he wakes up, nobody knows him, and nor does he know anyone. And out of frustration, he cries out and he says, Oy chavruta o mituta. Either give me death or give me friends. One cannot live alone. And that is why we are deterred from Hilchos Lashon Hara. Because we think, if you want to stay away from Lashon Hara and Echidus, you can't talk. You can't interact with people. You can't be social. You can't be friendly. And it's a mistake. The son of the Chofetz Chaim writes that the Chofetz Chaim was talkative. And he was a very social being. You could talk. The question is what you have to say. You could be like a peddler. What are you selling? And what do you buy? You don't need to be quiet. You could talk. You could buy and sell. But what are you buying and what are you selling? Is it sheker? Is it lashon hara? Is it machloikes, riv umodoin? Or is it divrei ritzui, divrei ahava, divrei achva, divrei toire v'yiras shamayim? That is the chiddush of the story. Maaseh b'roicha lechod, shohoyim esave b'yoras atzmuchim litzapori. And what he taught is, yes, I am a rochel. I'm a peddler. I'm not a shotgun. I'm not a hermit. I'm a social being. And I like people. And I want to sell salachayim. So what is your Sam Chaim? Mi wish a Chofetz Chaim oyev yomem lirestoiv netzoy l'shoincha miros v'secho medaber miemu sur mira v'yasei toiv bakesh shalom v'radefeho. That's the chiddush of the story. So my dear friends, start learning Hilchos Lashon Hara. You won't have to be strange. You're going to be the nicest person in the world, and you're going to have more friends than ever. Talk. Just be careful what you have to say. Yerotzen shenezke lasot tzon avinu shebeshamayim. Talmidei chachamim marbim shalom b'yolam. Have a beautiful day, and we should be zecher b'korav to the geula shleima and to see pnei Mashiach tzedkeinu b'mheru v'yomeinu. Amen.